I'm opening the floor for questions. Curtis.
I have a question for you, Margaret. So the cool stuff, by the way, the network, the joint network modeling. So these constraints. I mean, I yelled pretty loud, so I don't know if a microphone's really required. So it looked like you're adding these constraints sequentially, and it seemed like that sequential order was arbitrary. Now, I might be wrong on both of those points. So I guess really my question is, are these constraint functions and the difference in chi-square that you reported on that graph added sequentially? And if so, how do you determine the order that they're added?
That's a good question.
Can I contextualize it a little bit, maybe? Because one of your claims was that the dual status constraint function started to matter more in unstable groups, especially or the dual aggression, network started to matter more in unstable groups, especially compared to the dual status. But if you look at that graph, you have that big drop off in dual from independence to dual aggression, and almost nothing from status. And so if those are added sequentially, then we can't actually make claims about the status network because it's not independent of the aggression network. Do you get what I'm saying? Anyway, so.
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, so maybe we could talk after.
So do you add them sequentially, the constraint functions?
They did add them. Yes, they did. They do add them sequentially. We work with the Department of Statistics here at Davis, Fuxing Hasai and his students. They do get added sequentially.
And how do you determine that order?
I think it was pretty arbitrary in doing so. So I'd be happy to talk to you more about your particular question.
So I have two questions, one for Sarah and the other for Brenda. So Sarah, I'm curious that in your studies, how's the value of the items evaluated by these individuals? And are they evaluated as the absolute value in terms of how much do they prefer it? Or is it actually always evaluated as a relative value that is with respect to what the other, like the partner or the other individuals are getting? So this is my question for you, Sarah, and my question for Brenda is in the social network you were studying, seems like there's no immigration or emigration allowed. So in that case, if immigration or emigration are allowed, do you see that will improve the stability of the social network and reduce the probability of the social collapse, society collapse? Thank you.
So, great question. And I didn't get into it because of the time constraints, but what's really important, of course, is that if you're studying these relative values, you have to be able to say with some consistency that everybody has the same set of values. So we're looking at how they prefer the foods within themselves. So it's a within subjects evaluation, and we also do it for each individual separately in the social group. So we don't use the lumped values of, on average, the individuals prefer one thing over the other. So what we do is the least preferred food is a food that they will accept if we walk in when nothing else is going on and hand them 10 separate pieces of the food. They'll eat all 10 of them without pausing or hesitating. A food that is more preferred than that, on 2 separate days we do dichotomous choice tests between the low preferred food and what we think will be the medium preferred food. And we alternate back and forth to account for side biases, and they have to prefer the medium preferred over the low preferred at least 8 out of 10 times on both days to make sure that it's not only preferred, but it's consistently preferred, and same for between medium and high. And we have done studies. These guys show very consistent preferences over the long term. So if I prefer grapes to cucumbers today, I'm going to in a week, and I'm going to in 10 years. And the other thing we do is I always say cucumber and grape in the talks to keep it simple, but we don't actually already always use cucumber and grapes. We choose foods based on what every single individual in the group prefers. So if we have one individual who doesn't show a strong enough preference for a purported medium value food, then we keep going until we find a food where everyone does. Now, of course, what that means is that I can't tell you for certain that the difference in preference value between the low and the medium and the high is the same. And we've chosen to do it this way in order to make it, at least we know for certain that there is a consistent rank order. We've tried doing quantity assessments, so 1 versus 3 versus 5 or something along those lines, which would make them more consistent. Interestingly, they don't show an effect when you do quantities, at least on the few studies we've done. We think part of the problem, especially with some of these group studies, is they're looking from across a great distance. So it may be very difficult for them to tell whether I'm holding up 3 grapes or 5 grapes, but they can certainly tell the difference between a grape and a cucumber. So I don't actually think the fact that they aren't responding to quantity is particularly meaningful, because I think it's confounded with all these other issues. But that's how we do it. And again, if we have any one individual who doesn't show it, then we go back and retest. So that's our standardized definition.
So you're absolutely correct that we don't have immigration into these groups. We do have immigration because these animals are in research projects, and so we use those groups as a breeding colony, and so we do have that occurring. But it's actually a really good question, and I mean, we do see these kinds of social collapses in more semi-free ranging places as well, maybe not quite as often. It probably does have something to do with being in captivity and having 4, walls around you. But it's a really interesting question, because what we're doing now is experimental work where we're doing knockouts of these animals, permanent and temporary knockouts. And one of the things that we have found, we hypothesized that these natal males that are not leaving these groups, high-ranking natal males, are problematic and can help cause social collapse. And we've done some experimental work showing that these high-ranking natal males actually gain rank through their relationships with their high-ranked sisters and mothers. And so they're not gaining rank by the normal way an adult male would gain rank in a social group, by through the use of power and that sort of thing. And they actually develop their own SBT networks separately from the high-ranking alpha, the alpha and beta males, slowly. Not all do, but many do, the ones that we think are causing problems. And so one of the management recommendations we now have is to remove high-ranking natal males from these groups and to bring in unrelated males at some rate in order to keep that stability going. Because it turns out the unrelated males are the ones that are actually policing the conflict in these groups, because they have no skin in the game.
Sounds like the De Medicis. Okay, this is interdisciplinary, so I can say that this is outside my field. But I was really struck by the relationship between the signaling and decision-making that Jochen was talking about, and some of the themes in Brian's talk earlier. And then also, it was interesting that And then it was interesting to me in the first talk how the response of people around you, or primates around you, in terms of splitting or not splitting, really influenced the reward or penalty that you felt like you were receiving, and so therefore should also influence signaling or the outcome, as Brian was talking about this morning. And so I'm not sure if anyone has thoughts on that theme, but.
Yeah, so perhaps just briefly addressing our 2 talks. So obviously we've both been talking about stochastic and probabilistic mechanisms of decision-making, just from different viewpoints. And what you'll basically find is, in the end, the mathematics that you need to describe these different processes are obviously convergent, right? Regardless of whether you're looking at the behavior or the underlying neural mechanisms.
And I'll just add one thing. I don't study signaling, but one of the things that we're really interested in these large group experiments is, what are we seeing? And I think the video clip I showed where Joey was pinching the temper tantrum, that looks like signaling to me. So that's the sort of thing we'd like to get into more.
Hi, I have a question for Sarah. You alluded to a little bit that kin matters when it comes to sort of protester responses to inequity. Have you tried with sort of mother and offspring? Because it seems like, at least in human species, we're willing to sacrifice and give and make it so our offspring have way more than we, like that's sort of the American dream, or a dream in a lot of different cultures, to give more to your children than to yourself, so that you would expect that the protesters that's signaling to inequity in an offspring situation would be very different.
Yeah, I agree. We don't have much data on kin versus non-kin pairs because we've been trying explicitly to work on non-kin pairs and to avoid that confound. I do have one study I didn't talk about where we looked at the willingness of individuals to work together to pull in a heavy bar pull in order to get food rewards. And sometimes the food rewards were the same and sometimes they were different. And what we found was that whether or not whether the foods were the same or not made no impact on the frequency with which a pair pulled. What mattered was whether or not they were sharing when the rewards were unequal. So if Jochen and I are working together, if I'm dominating the better reward in that unequal case, we quit cooperating in all conditions. But if I'm only taking it half the time, then we cooperate at a very high rate in all conditions, whether the foods are equitable or inequitable. And interestingly, in that case, we did non-kin pairs and kin pairs were mother-offspring pairs. And we saw the same pattern in both pairs. Kin cooperated at a higher rate across all conditions, but in some kin pairs we saw the inequitable relationships and the decrease in cooperation across all conditions, and in some pairs we saw the cooperative ones develop. And we didn't have very many non-kin or kin pairs, so we can't say too much. But in some cases where we only had 3 pairs that were kin pairs and they weren't sharing. And I can't remember which order it was, but in 2 cases I think it was the mom who was taking more, and in 1 case it was the kid who was taking more. So we're not seeing a consistent pattern there, but obviously it's something we'd like to look at further.
I'm going to ask you to repeat the question into the microphone so we have it for the tape.
In these highly hierarchical groups, how does that impact resource sharing?
It impacts it in that there's not a lot of resource sharing particularly in rhesus macaques, there's not a lot of resource sharing. They're kind of known for being very despotic, highly aggressive, and not very cooperative in terms of those kinds of things. Although they have very, very strong and complex grooming networks as well. So, but yeah, resource sharing they do a lot of fighting over resources, and obviously the high-ranking animals are more likely to partake in those resources.
I have a question. Well, actually, one for Sarah regarding, do they ever kind of come up with teamwork approaches to, if one person, if one monkey's consistently getting the lower ranked food, did they ever think of handing the token to the other one so that they can get the higher ranked food instead? And my question for Sarah is, you clearly really value group cohesion over collapse, but then you're kind of suggesting that maybe some of the other monkeys might prefer actually, we could reframe collapse as reconfiguration. And then, so, as clearly a lot of congressmen choose to, so it's the idea that we want to prevent collapse by telling people it's going to happen might be the opposite. They might say, great, that's our aim.
So no, we haven't seen any evidence that they are trying to really work hard to rectify these situations. We have, in all of the studies we've done, I think we have 3 cases of chimps where the subordinate had a grape and let their partner have it. But in every case, it wasn't clear. Chimps' hands are configured very differently from ours, so picking up something like a grape is very difficult. They can't do a pincer grip. So it wasn't clear that they didn't just drop it and decide not to fight the dominant over it. But of course, this isn't a great situation for sharing because we're giving them a single grape, which you really can't share very well. And all of the good studies of food sharing have involved foods that are more inherently shareable. Let's give you a few apple slices so you can break something off and share it. And one of the things we're also trying to do with these group studies is set up these situations where multiple individuals can work together and for bar pole sorts of things where maybe one gets a better reward and one gets a less good reward, and maybe in that case they would share it. Okay, you pulled in for that crummy piece of celery, but over here I got half an apple sliced up in pieces and I'll let you have some of it. We do have some evidence from capuchin monkeys that they are sharing more in these cases where the foods are more divisible, and it looks like chimps in a similar sort of group cooperation setting are doing the same thing. So I think we might find it. It's probably not all that common, but the studies that we're doing aren't well designed to look for it because they're inherently non-shareable.
And you're absolutely right that there are many individuals in those groups that are very happy about the idea of a collapse occurring. In fact, they're negotiating that. One of the things that we've found is that when we temporarily remove high-ranking animals, animals do try to vie for increasing their social status. And so presumably these social collapses are occurring as a result of subgroups of animals that are sort of being opportunistic in trying to increase their social status and therefore their ability to partake in the resources. So that's what's happening. It's a kind of a constant process in these groups. It's monkey politics is what it is. Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about how you get the neurons doing log likelihood? You said, and some plausible assumptions. And I mean, it's very interesting. I'd like to hear a little bit more if you could.
Yeah, so to make it short, there are basically two assumptions that you have to make there. One of them is what the actual distribution of the activity of those neurons is when the underlying value that they're representing changes. And for example, one of the assumptions that you can make there is a Poisson distribution, which is often used for describing the activity of cortical neurons. And when you make that assumption, actually it turns out it works. The second assumption that you have to make is the idea of basically a neuron anti-neuron pair. So you basically need two groups of neurons that have exactly opposite properties. So basically, in our case, right, with the left-right, as one of the groups increases its activity when one direction is stronger, the other one has to decrease accordingly. And just based on those two assumptions, just when you write down the equations, you'll see in the end that the log likelihood will be proportional to that difference.
Hi, so I came kind of late, so I don't remember where this exact studies, but I feel like I have these general questions for interdisciplinary study in social science. So people tend to use monkey or animal behaviors to to study our own society. So I wonder if there is so for the scholars, do you think that your research has some kind of restrictions in terms of external validity when you are applying what you learn from the monkeys to human beings?
Okay, I can start. So for the kinds of tasks that we are studying, we are actually comparing the behavior between humans and non-human primates, and we're basically making sure that we are only looking at types of decisions that have similar behavior to basically make sure that there is the validity, right? So there are certainly limitations. So there are, of course, many kinds of decision behaviors that humans are able to do, right, that you could never study in animals. So we have certain limitations, but we basically make sure that the validity is there.
That's a great question, of course. And one of the things, we do the same thing. So for all of my behavioral experiments, we test usually kids and adults if we can do it. And we're also trying to begin testing people on within subjects designs. So for most of the work I've done on experimental economics games, we've tried to test humans and primates with individuals they know on these repeated designs to increase the validity of comparing the non-human primate paradigms to the human paradigms. Because for obvious reasons that Jochen nicely touched on in his talk, they're different. I mean, we can't tell them what to do. But actually, I'd also like to point out that one of the values of studying the non-human primates is I can do what I talked about here, where we go from very controlled studies with dyads that we pull out of the group and choose, to studies where we try to compare everyone with everyone else, to these group-level studies in a way that really can't feasibly be done with humans. I can't grab the same group of people and bring them in over the course of several years. I can't control their social environment. I can't decide necessarily who they're going to be paired with. We can do this to some degree by working with kids in daycares where we can go in repeatedly. But even then, if their mom moves across the country, there's nothing I can do about that. And so studying the non-human primates gives us a way to ask these questions that we can't ask in humans, and also does a better job of helping to disentangle where some of the biological constraints on human behavior may come in. I'm not talking about any sort of biological determinism here, but understanding where there are these evolutionary restrictions. Mel Konner nicely refers to it as the tangled wing. You know, if your wing is tangled in the bushes, there are only so many ways you can get out, and we're interested in trying to figure out what are those constraints in humans, and the way to do that is to look at other species.
Yeah, I agree with what Sarah said completely. In fact, you know, we're trying to use these models here at our Primate Center not only to understand group stability and increasing the welfare of these animals, but also as a translational model for human health. So we have a whole health component that we're looking at, and how networks are. How structures and networks and roles in networks affect health outcomes. And frankly, we couldn't do the kind of work that we're doing with human populations, because these animals are very well characterized behaviorally. We know everything about their kinship patterns. We have data on biobehavioral organization, from physiological measures to personality and temperament. So we're able to put together a very complex set of variables to look at how variation in those variables affects health that we think will be applicable, even though not exactly the same in terms of the types of networks, will be applicable to human populations. So they offer us a wonderful model to be able to look at complexity in ways that we can't do it as easily in human populations, particularly because of experimental component and control of a social environment.
Well, thank you all very much for attending, and I'm sure, oh, is there one more question? One more. Okay, one more question.
Okay. My question is for Sarah. So I was wondering if you could comment on whether there was any influence of dominance relationships in response to inequity.
Another great question. So we would assume that there would be an influence of dominance. I mean, obviously it permeates their lives and influences almost everything. And we would expect that the relationship would be more dominant individuals are used to getting more, so they would be more upset by inequity than subordinate individuals. Now, interestingly, we don't see that large of an effect of dominance. When we do see it, it's always in the predicted direction. You always see dominants are more upset than subordinates. But of course, one of the confounds is we've been doing a lot of these on pairs that we pull in, and they're interacting with the human. So it may be that having the human there influences their reactions to some degree. It may either ameliorate the dominant's response, or maybe the dominant says, well, yes, I'm interacting with the subordinate over here, but they're not the ones who caused it. So that's one reason we've tried to go to these more group paradigms, which helps with some of this external validity and helps us look at behaviors that maybe, Joey had the temper tantrum right in front of us, but maybe he wanders off to do it. We're also trying to look at paradigms where we can look more at the animals interacting with one another to get at that. But where we do see dominance interactions, they're exactly as you'd predict.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you all for a wonderful panel. And